I turned the crystal handle to Mr. Mercer's study, and the room hit me like cold water. A billionaire folded over his desk, bottles down on the rug. Pill vials tipped like little white flags, a laptop blinking through a half-typed goodbye. And in that quiet, that feels like a church after dark, I heard the thin, wrong sound of a man barely breathing. So I did the only thing a person raised by a no-nonsense grandmother does when life gets real. I called 911 with hands I couldn't steady and prayed they'd find us in time. They did, moving fast, speaking that clipped language of people who wrestle with the end for a living. And when they pushed him out past the door, he blinked at me once like a man waking inside a storm. Then he was gone, and I was standing in a study that smelled like oak polish and regret, deciding whether to leave it a mess or put the night back together. The way you do when someone you love has been sick, and you can't fix the body, but you can straighten the room. I capped pens, tossed bottles, tucked the goodbyes out of sight. Set a glass of water where he'd see it if he came back before the ice melted. And I told myself, Tessa, you did the right thing, even if right gets you fired in places like this. You know what I mean. The Mercer house sits up on a hill in Ridgeview, Connecticut, looking like old money with good lighting. And I worked there, because of $500 a week keeps the lights on at our apartment on Juniper Street, keeps Grandma's pills organized in those little plastic squares, keeps me from stitching together 3 part-time jobs that pay in backaches and bus transfers, and from day one, Mrs. Whitby, head housekeeper bun tight enough to hold the roof on, made the rules clear enough to frame. We don't chit-chat with the family. We don't knock on the study door. We exist only when needed and disappear when we're done. I can do invisible. That's my secret weapon. I show up, I notice the small things. I keep places so clean, grief has to take its shoes off at the door. But even with all the marble and the polished silver and those sad paintings that cost more than a starter home, you could feel it. A house preserved like a museum for a life that got interrupted. A nursery down the hall with a Mogul, catching the AC like a slow orbit. A piano that didn't know a living hand. Meals that came back to the kitchen barely touched the kind of silence that hums in your bones. And even if you don't know the particulars, you recognize the shape of loss. Because loss is a language we all speak sooner or later. 2 days after the ambulance, I walked into the study after lunch and found Mr. Mercer stretched out on the leather sofa, not wrecked this time, just arranged like a man who fell asleep with his shoes on. And what stood out wasn't him, but the stage around him. The laptop cracked open to spreadsheets, papers laid in a way you could call careless. If you'd never met a lawyer, a wallet sitting a little too obvious near a crystal paperweight that could pay somebody's tuition. And I thought, all right, so this is a test, not of cleaning, but of character. And you pass it by being kind in ways no one is supposed to see. I went to the linen closet, came back with a soft throw, and tucked it over him. Slow enough that if he was pretending, he could keep. Pretending opened the window 2 inches, so the room could breathe something other than its own expensive air. Rinsed his coffee cup in the tiny sink because dried rings make a room feel abandoned. Set 3 daisies from the south garden in a little vase because white rooms turn gentle when something living sits inside them, and I left like a breeze, felt not caught. The next morning there was a note by the coffee machine in that firm, practiced hand. Thank you for the flowers. Then a second note. Good call on the window. Then it became a quiet ritual, him noticing what I'd done, and me answering in the smallest ways. Roses are blooming near the wall. Sunsets look good from the library. If you slide the chair 2 feet left, and inside that simple exchange, a frozen house remembered the word home. when he finally asked me to come in and sit. "Miss Jordan, I should say thank you in a way a person can hear. We talked like people who had no business being honest." In a room like that, he told me about a daughter who chased butterflies and a wife who hummed while she folded laundry. His voice doing that break that hurts and heals in the same breath. And I told him about Grandma's basil growing in yogurt cups on our sill, about the way a clean room can make a day feel less heavy, about why acting like a human in a house with rules doesn't make you reckless, it just makes you human. He looked like a man who hadn't exhaled properly in 3 years and was trying it out for the first time. Yeah, that happened. Good stories could stop there. But life has other plans, and Sloan Voss walked in wearing 2 of them, a designer coat and a reporter like a pet, smiling with all teeth and calling him Caleb Darling loud enough for the marble to hear. And before I could set down the wreath, I was carrying. She was implying a whole romance out of my job description, trying to bait a scandal with a camera inching up from the hip. A widower in a big house, a young woman who knows her way around his private rooms. It writes itself, she purred. And I don't know your life, but I know this. There are folks who will turn your kindest work into their ugliest story, then swear they're just reporting the facts. 2 mornings later, the safe in the master bedroom open, gaped like a broken mouth. The velvet box that held his late wife's butterfly locket. Empty the cops in our hall with notebooks and tight faces, asking crisp questions that don't bend. They search the staff lockers, because that's where suspicion starts. Metal squares that can hold a life, if you fold it small. And when they opened mine, the locket winked up at us, wrapped in one of my cleaning cloths like a magic trick. No one clapped for Miss Jordan. Lieutenant Delgado said, "Professional as a water bill. You're under arrest for burglary and theft, and if you've never walked out past hedges trimmed by people who don't know your name, while cameras chew your face off for a 6 p.m. headline. May you never, because it tastes like tin and humiliation, and that old sour I smelled in the study on the first night. Jail is loud and fluorescent, and full of clocks that don't move, and I slept in pieces on a mat, so thin it could pass for paperwork. Went to arraignment with wrists cold from cuffs. Watched the word gold digger smear across my picture like a cheap sticker. Then went home and wrote my resignation on the back of an envelope. Because sometimes love is stepping out of the blast radius, even when you'd rather build a wall. He didn't let me go. Not really, not in the way that counts. He went to work, not the kind with board votes and PowerPoints. The kind that looks like pulling traffic cams from the road outside the gate and finding a black sedan, idling too long. The night the safe opened like tracing the plate to a shell company, with a line back to Sloan's office. Like a handyman named Ricky Hale with a record and a service key that went missing 2 months before finding cash deposits that hit his account like clockwork. Like cell pings stacking up at the wrong times in the wrong places. Delgado called it circumstantial until Sloan found out circumstantial can tighten like a noose, and when they took her out of a lobby with too much glass, she started bargaining. In that way people do when they realize the camera loves a perp walk, even more than a gossip column. Calling it business, calling me a footnote, calling him naive. And he answered in the flat, polite tone that means everything is over. You tried to buy me by burying a decent woman that isn't business that's rot. The headlines shifted in a wind most folks pretend they always knew was coming. Accused housekeeper cleared as rival. Confesses to frame up. And yes, relief is a strange country. First you collapse, then you stand. Then you decide what kind of person you want to be, now that the ground under you isn't moving. He knocked on our apartment door with grocery store flowers and eyes that finally looked alive. I put down the ladle. Grandma told him to get the cornbread out of the oven before it burned, and he said the words a person waits to hear when their name has been chewed by strangers. Tessa, I didn't fight for you to fix a story. I fought for you because I see you. And that's the moment I believed a house like his could learn how to breathe for real. We built something simple and stubborn after that. I came back, but not to the linen closet. I moved over to the Mercer Foundation, because if there's one thing I know, it's how to find quiet people who get it done and put resources in their hands. He kept the windows open and the daisies coming, and the apologies. Honest, we ate Sunday dinner at Grandma's, and when he asked me to marry him in the community garden, we funded on the south side with kids running through basil and bees nosing petals. I said yes with my whole chest, because home is a person as much as a place. And then, because this is America, and power never leaves a meeting without minutes, the board called an emergency session, talked optics like prejudice in a suit. Suggested an ethics review, like love was a conflict of interest, asked if I'd sign a paper promising not to influence decisions, as if kindness leaves fingerprints. You can dust, and I sat there in a mall dress and said I won't be a ghost in a house again. And he said we can weather a vote, or we can weather each other. And I'm picking us. And we went home and ate leftover dumplings out of plastic, like people who have outlived other people's opinions. We married in Grandma's yard under strings of dollar store lights. Mrs. Whitby cried exactly once, then directed the caterer like a field marshal. The locket sat on the guest book table because what's stolen can be found when somebody refuses to stop looking. And the house on the hill learned to smell like soup and laughter and fresh air without asking permission. So tell me this, and be honest. Did the story change for you when you learned I'm a black woman, working in a rich man's home, when the rival showed up in heels instead of a ski mask, when the cops held a locket like a magic trick next to a locker? With my name, is testing someone's character by pretending to sleep smart, or just fear with better lighting? Would you have quit to protect a person you cared about, or stayed to absorb the storm? Where do right and wrong start when the rules are written by people with keys to back doors? Drop your take in the comments. Argue with me if you need to tell me the time someone judged you wrong, and you stood up anyway. And if this hit you anywhere tender, like the video, subscribe for more stories told. The way life actually feels messy and true, and worth the breath it takes to say them out loud.